Operation Paul Bunyan, the day the world nearly went to war over a tree. In August 1976, the world stood on the brink of war. The United States and North Korea, two nations still technically at war, found themselves locked in a deadly confrontation, not over territory, not over ideology, but over a tree. To understand Operation Paul Bunyan, we must first understand the ground on which it began. The Korean Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. Created in 1953 as part of the Korean Armistice Agreement, this narrow 2.5-mile wide strip of land stretches across the entire peninsula. It separates north from south, communism from democracy, and peace from destruction. The DMZ is unlike anywhere else on Earth. Machine guns point in both directions. Watchtowers glare at one another through mist and razor wire. Every step, every glance, every breath carries the weight of history. At the center of this tension stood a single poplar tree, nearly 100 feet tall, rooted at Panmunjom, the joint security area where soldiers from both sides could look directly into each other's eyes. This tree stood near Checkpoint 3, a critical observation post for the United Nations Command. But there was a problem. The poplar's thick branches obscured the line of sight between the UN checkpoint and another South Korean outpost. In the DMZ, visibility meant safety. Without it, soldiers could vanish into the fog without warning. And in this world, that could mean death. On August 18, 1976, Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett were tasked with trimming the branches. Both men were seasoned officers. Boniface, a calm and respected leader, and Barrett, a sharp and dedicated young lieutenant. They led a small work detail of South Korean soldiers and unarmed American personnel into the joint security area. They carried only axes, no rifles, no sidearms, in accordance with the DMZ's strict armistice rules. But as the first branches hit the ground, they were approached by North Korean soldiers led by a man named Pak Chul. American troops called him Lieutenant Bulldog, a nickname born from his fierce temper and hostility toward UN forces. Park demanded the pruning stop immediately. Captain Boniface ignored the command, citing the right to maintain their post's visibility. Minutes later, Pak Chul called for reinforcements. Within moments, more than 30 North Korean soldiers appeared, armed with clubs and crowbars. The Americans were outnumbered, surrounded, and unarmed. Tension turned to chaos. In broad daylight, the North Koreans attacked. Captain Boniface and Lieutenant Barrett were beaten to death, their own axes turned against them. Other soldiers barely escaped, sprinting across the demarcation line to safety as shouts and blows echoed across Panmunjom. News of the attack reached Washington within hours. President Gerald Ford's Situation Room went into emergency session. The images were horrifying. 2 American officers had been brutally murdered in a supposedly neutral zone. The options were laid out: a surgical strike on the North Korean barracks, a full military invasion, or something else. Something that would send a message without plunging the world into another Korean war. After hours of tense deliberation, the president authorized a plan unlike any before it. A show of force so overwhelming, so precise, that it would leave no doubt as to America's resolve. They called it Operation Paul Bunyan, named after the legendary giant lumberjack of American folklore. Its objective: finish cutting down the poplar tree, but this time under the full might of the US military. On the morning of August 21st, just 3 days after the murders, the operation began. 23 American and South Korean vehicles rolled into the DMZ. 16 engineers stepped forward, carrying chainsaws. But this time, they weren't alone. Hovering above them, B-52 bombers roared across the sky, flanked by F-4 Phantom jets. Cobra attack helicopters swept the perimeter, their cannons locked on North Korean positions. On the ground, hundreds of heavily armed South Korean commandos fanned out, silent, motionless, waiting for the order to fire. Even the USS Midway, an aircraft carrier, took position off the Korean coast. Across the Pacific, nuclear-capable bombers sat ready on the runway. It was an unmistakable message: we will finish the job, and we will not be stopped. The chainsaws roared to life. The North Korean soldiers, now dozens deep behind their posts, watched, but did nothing. The Americans cut. Branch after branch, the tree came down, each fall echoing like thunder through the valley. 42 minutes later, only a stump remained. Operation Paul Bunyan had succeeded. Not a single shot fired, no lives lost. But the message had been heard loud and clear. North Korea, for the first and only time in its history, issued a formal expression of regret. Kim Il-sung himself admitted sorrow for the incident, a rare moment of humility from one of the world's most secretive leaders. Today, that stump still stands at Panmunjom, weathered, fenced, and protected, a silent monument to a day when the world came inches from nuclear war. Over a tree. Operation Paul Bunyan remains one of the most flawlessly executed demonstrations of military strength in modern history. It's a story of discipline, of a nation showing power without rage, precision without bloodshed. And perhaps that's the lesson buried within that stump. In moments when pride and provocation collide, restraint can be the greatest weapon of all. More stories, more truth. Subscribe for more.